The fluorescent hum of his cubicle was the soundtrack to a slow death by 1,000 paper cuts, each invoice he processed, each data field he filled, a tiny burial shroud for the vibrant, curious boy he'd once been, the one who'd look at a crumbling wall and see a mosaic of stories, who'd hear the chaotic symphony of the city and feel its rhythm in his bones, not the dull, monotonous ticking of the office clock counting down the hours until he could escape the life he'd somehow built for himself, a life that felt like wearing a suit 2 sizes too small, constricting and utterly foreign. Leo, at 26, was a ghost in his own skin, drifting through days that were carbon copies of each other, his dreams of being a writer now just a faint, embarrassing echo from his college years, a fantasy he'd packed away with his old notebooks, convincing himself that stability was a worthy trade for passion, that this numb, predictable safety was what being a grown-up was supposed to feel like. The catalyst for his unraveling wasn't a grand disaster but a quiet, crushing moment of clarity. He was sitting in a mandatory, synergy workshop, his boss droning on about, leveraging core competencies, and as Leo looked around the room at the faces of his colleagues, their eyes glazed over, their postures slumped in a universal language of resignation, a single, terrifying thought pierced through the fog: is this it? Is this the sum total of my existence? To sit in this beige room and listen to words that mean nothing until I'm old and gray? And the thought was so visceral, so suffocating, that he actually felt his chest tighten, a panic not of fear, but of profound loss, the realization that he was actively participating in the murder of his own potential. That night, he didn't go home, he walked, aimlessly, through parts of the city he usually avoided, his polished shoes scuffing against cracked pavement, until he found himself in a dimly lit alley behind a row of restaurants, where the air was thick with the smell of spices and garbage, and there, huddled against a brick wall, was an old man with eyes like ancient coal, playing a battered violin with a tenderness that made the raw, screeching notes sound like a heartbreaking opera, and without a case or expectation for coin, just playing for the sake of the music itself, for the sheer, defiant act of creating beauty in a forgotten place. Leo stood there, transfixed, until the alley was empty and the man was gone, and he felt something he hadn't in years, a genuine, unforced tear tracing a path down his cheek, and in that tear was the release of all the pent-up stories, the suppressed observations, the voice he had silenced. He ran home, not with a plan, but with a compulsion, and he dug through boxes in his closet until he found it. The old, coffee-stained laptop where he'd once written terrible poetry and sprawling, ambitious novels that went nowhere, and he opened a blank document, his fingers hovering over the keys, trembling not from fear, but from the seismic shift happening within him. He didn't write about the violinist, he wrote about the alley, the grime, the steam rising from the vents like the city's breath, the profound loneliness that could somehow birth such connectedness, and the words didn't come hesitantly, they poured out of him like a floodgate had been obliterated, raw and messy and truer than anything he'd ever produced, and he posted it on a forgotten blog at 3 a.m., not for anyone to see, but simply to prove to the universe that he still could, that the boy was not entirely dead. He made it a ritual, his secret rebellion. After his soul-crushing workdays, he would wander, not as Leo the data analyst, but as a hunter of moments, a collector of whispers, seeking out the hidden pulse of the city, the midnight baker flowering his hands like a priest preparing for sacrament, the fierce, protective love of a sister defending her younger brother from bullies in a dusty park, the silent communication between two fishermen mending their nets at dawn, and he would write their stories, not with pity or romanticism, but with a reverence for their truth, his prose becoming leaner, more powerful, each sentence a honed blade cutting through the bullshit he endured all day. His anonymous blog, which he called The Unseen Symphony, started to gather readers, not in viral millions, but in a slow, steady trickle of people who commented things like, "This made me look at my bus driver differently today," or, "I felt this in my soul," and this quiet connection, this evidence that his words could land and matter to another human being, became a kind of fuel more potent than any paycheck, forcing him to stare down the terrifying math of his life, the 45 hours a week he traded for rent money versus the 5 hours of writing that actually made him feel alive. The leap of faith, when it came, was less a leap and more a terrified stumble forward. He didn't quit in a blaze of glory, he simply negotiated to go part-time, a move that halved his income and doubled his anxiety, but freed up 3 entire days a week that he guarded ferociously for his writing, living on rice and beans in a newfound sense of purpose that was more nourishing than any steak dinner. There were setbacks, of course, months where he questioned his sanity, where the rejections from literary magazines piled up, where the fear of failure was a cold knot in his stomach, but the memory of that resigned feeling in the conference room was a ghost that scared him more than any financial insecurity, And he kept going, honing his craft, until a small indie publisher, captivated by the unique voice of the Unseen Symphony, offered him a book deal, not for a grand fantasy, but for a collection of these very stories about the city and its invisible people. The day his advance copy arrived, he held the book in his hands, his name etched on the cover, and he cried, not just for the achievement, but for the journey, for the terrified part of himself he'd had to leave behind in that cubicle, for the courage it took to listen to the quietest, most authentic whisper of his soul, and for the profound understanding he now possessed, that unleashing your power isn't about a sudden, explosive transformation, but about the daily, courageous decision to stop hiding, to pick up your instrument, whether it's a pen, a camera, or a kind word, and to play your song, however imperfectly, in whatever alley you find yourself in, because that is how you truly come alive.